Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I'm going to be reviewing a book that I have been eyeing for a while and been wanting to read, and I'm so glad that I finally took it out of the library and gave it a chance because this wound up exceeding my expectations and being a very fun read. I am of course talking about 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker. So this is what the cover looks like. It kind of has a, I would say, medieval vibe, but it is a fantasy series and it's a little over 300 pages long, so you have some depth to this book. But I, as mentioned, have been seeing this on the library shelf for a while. It's one of those books that's always caught my mind, and I had read the back of the book several times and it was interesting, but I feel like by the time I always saw it in the library, my library book bag had been entirely filled with books, so I had no room to read it. But I finally decided to check it out and read it because I had been thinking about it for such a long time, and I'm glad I did because I had a great time reading this book. Now, the author, K.J. Parker, I had actually never read anything by him before. I found online that it's actually a pseudonym for, I believe, Tom Hold, and I actually haven't read anything by him either, so that was a dead end. I was like, oh, it's a pseudonym for someone else who I haven't read. So I have not read anything, but I would definitely, following this book, read other things by this author. So let's talk about the plot and what happened in this series. So I knew from the back of the book this is kind of a wrong man for the situation sort of setup. So we are following Orhan, who is a military engineer. He just wants to build bridges. He just wants to live his life in the military. And he notices at following some events that maybe things are going wrong with the cities that he's interacting with, and there may be a siege coming. So at one point he decides he wants to get back to a main city because he wants to be prepared for whatever siege is coming. There's signs like raids and communication and deceased people who give him signs that something isn't right. So he is just the leader of an engineering group who just decides that maybe it's in the best interest to go back to a city. On the way back to this city from where they were out in the country doing their little engineering things, he comes across a slaughtered version of his army, the slaughtered version being the only version that there was. So suddenly he realizes that maybe things for his city aren't doing as well as possible in this fantasy realm, so he decides to hurry on and back to the city. Back in the city, he finds out that not only has the entire standing military been killed, there's only the watch and people who are in like the parks and recreation department or parks and garden department in the city who are left. The emperor, who is supposed to be in charge of the city when he, as the highest ranking military officer, goes to see the emperor to get instructions, finds out that the emperor has been in a how would you say it? A non-waking state, like a vegetable state, after finding out that his two sons, who were the heirs to the throne, had been killed in a boating accident. So this is all things, the emperor being in a vegetative state and the death of the two heirs was information that was not revealed to the public, which means that the only person left to take charge of an advancing army who is going to besiege the city is Orhan, the ranking officer in the city, who is a military engineer, someone who does not have combat experience, someone who just builds bridges, someone who is not fit to be defending the city, but who is going to be in charge of the defense of the city in a siege. So Orhan has to organize the city, and he is facing a lot of challenges. So first of all, the military is dead. Or most of the military. We have this engineering brigade, we have people who are on the walls, but they were part of the parks and garden department, so not even the real people. We have the police sort of people, the watch, and they do have strong walls. So the city can really lock up tight, but they're going to have to do a lot when they're locked up. They also have problems like lack of water that they're going to have to face because the enemy will cut off the aqueduct. They are running low on food. They don't have a lot of military supplies or supplies in general. A lot of people deserted the city on boats, so they have to figure out what they're going to do with regard to that. They don't have a lot of supplies to arm people. So even if they wanted to arm people, they don't have a lot of weapons or armor or anything like that. And to top things off, Orhan is actually an outsider. He doesn't belong to the ethnicity slash race slash people group that the city belongs to, so he's also fighting an uphill battle. There's also problems like two rival gangs in the city that usually fight against one another, who, if he wants the city to survive the siege, he's going to have to get to work together. And again, he's not a diplomat, he is not a seasoned soldier, he is a military engineer. So he's the wrong man for the situation, and he's going to have to do his best. And this is narrated in first person as though he is telling an account. The framing tale is that he is giving an oral narration of his account of this siege, and then people from the future in this fantasy world are looking back at this, and this is revealed closer to the end of the book. They're looking back at this and wondering if this is a truthful account or is this kind of a fantasy account. So it's kind of read as like a historical text, but I think the narration and the storytelling is quite well done. This was a really funny fantasy series. Obviously, you're dealing with some more serious topics. I mean, a whole army gets slaughtered pretty close to the beginning of the series. There's people being besieged, there's death, people are gonna die, people are gonna get hurt. But overall, there seems to be a light tone, and I just found the premise really funny. I think this premise really works for me. It actually reminds me of a Jim Hines book that I read very recently, Goblin Quest, where a goblin, this under-equipped member of this faux D&D party, winds up doing quite a lot of good for the party and actually winds up saving himself and doing a lot of good for his little goblin community. So I think I really am drawn to this idea of the wrong person being in the wrong situation. So the wrong person for the situation is paired up and having to make the best of it. I think that's something I find really enjoyable, and it adds a little bit of humor to the situation if done right. I think you can also have a fantasy series where maybe the wrong person's in the wrong situation and things get horribly dark and terrible fast. That's definitely a vibe. It's not the vibe I'm trying to go for. If I'm reading a fantasy series, I'm probably reading for fun, not to be educated. If I want to be depressed, I'll probably read about like sanitation practices in the Middle Ages and things like that. There's enough depressing stuff in real life. I don't really like to read a lot of that in the fiction that I read for fun, but I don't think it's wrong to do that. If you want something that's a little darker, maybe this isn't quite the series for you. I wouldn't say this is like Terry Pratchett level comedy where it's all comedic, but it's also not super dark and gritty if that is your style. I think the pacing is really good. I flew through this book. Of course, I was actually sick the day I read it, so maybe I flew through the book because there was nothing else for me to do but lie very still in bed and read. So that's what I did. I read it in one entire day in one entire sitting, but asterisk, I was sick, so there was nothing else for me to do. But I do think the pacing was good and the story was interesting. I have a lot of books checked out, if you can see. So if I didn't want to read something, if I didn't want to read this, if the pacing was slow, I would have switched to a different book. I think there was a really interesting point of tension that the author added to keep it interesting. I think without this detail, it would have been just a little less interesting. And that is, at one point, Orhan, who remember is an outsider to the group of people he is defending in the city, finds out that he has a strong connection to the leader of the other side of the military. Like the besieging party is related to him. The leader of the besieging party is related to him in the sense that they have shared community and background. So suddenly there's a tension where Orhan is working to defend a city that has treated him like an outsider his entire life, but does he stick to that duty, that maybe moral obligation that he feels to defend the city, or does he almost defect to his friend or the person who he feels more closely related to, who's on the besieging end? And we see that the push and pull where he feels like he doesn't really belong in the city, but he clearly has connections and some sort of moral obligation, or like he personally feels a moral obligation to support and help these people, but he also feels like maybe he connects more with the people who are outside his city, trying to actively get in. I do also like the author included these two rival gangs that are inside the city. I don't know if gangs, this doesn't really describe it fully. They're two different like unions of fighters who work in the amphitheater. It's very Roman. Like clearly the author just used the Roman Empire to construct his fantasy world, which I think is totally fine. So there's two different unions, and those unions also associate with like people, so you pay into this union and they protect you. But of course there's also a lot of clashing because humans tend to become like that. And something that I like is that whenever there isn't an immediate threat, like whenever the siege isn't actively hitting the walls, when they're just camped a little ways back and things feel a little nicer, like they've let up a little bit, then the two rival gangs start causing problems with each other, which I feel like it really shows human nature. There's all these sci-fi books that when aliens come to Earth, the humans band together to fight them, which could happen. I mean, we haven't had an alien invasion, so maybe that would happen, but I feel like humans do tend to not always work together when it would be in their best interest to work together. I think that is something that happens. So I think it is a little realistic that the two gangs will come together, or the two unions, maybe unions is the better word. The two unions will come and work together when there's an immediate threat, like when people are trying to scale the walls, but they will not work together if it seems like everything's under control. Like the food situation's sorted, the water situation's sorted, there seems to be hope, light at the end of the tunnel, then they're going back to their usual business of, well, I don't know, killing each other, rioting, doing their things. So I did like that aspect. I like the fact that I feel like Parker has an insight into human nature that he's clearly noticed, although it's not a unique insight. I feel like a lot of people have noticed that, but I did think that was a very interesting insight that he included in this book. As mentioned, this was my first read by KJ Parker. but I'm definitely going to read more. I really loved it. I thought it was funny. I really hope that the rest of his writing is in this style because I liked the writing style. I liked his humor. I liked his fantasy series, and I'm excited to read more. If you've read anything by KJ Parker, or is it Tom Hold, the person that KJ Parker is actually a pseudonym for him, please let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. Or if you've read 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City, please leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. I love to receive those too. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this book review, and I hope you have a great rest.